أي زمن من الأزمنة. The word yawm means any time period. Yeah. So when it says sittat ayyam, that the creation of the heavens and the earth were in 6 days, we know that from chapter 69 verse 8, في يوم كان مقداره 50,000 سنة, that a day can be 50,000 years. In chapter 32 of the Quran, it says ألف سنة مما تعدون, 1,000 years. So a day can be 1,000 years, it could be 50,000 years. In Surah Al-Ma'idah, اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا. Al-Yawm here could mean less than a day. So, as Asfahani mentions in his dictionary, the word Yawm could mean any period of time. It could mean a short period of time. It could mean a long period of time. Another evidence for that.
It could be like an aeon. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So another evidence for that is that the Sahaba asked the Prophet Muhammad one time, "What do we do when Ad-Dajjal comes?" Ad-Dajjal is, we believe, is an antichrist. Yeah. So he said, the first day, how do we pray and so on? Yeah. So he said the first day is going to be like a year. But how can a day be like a year unless it could be described as longer than 24 hours, right? So, and then he said the second day is a month and so on. So when the Quran says 6 days, we don't know the length of those days. For sure. I mean, there's some guesses.
Well, then that's a very strange way of using the word day, because the word day usually just means like 24 hours in most languages, I assume.
It could mean that as well.
Because in English, for example, we don't have the use of like day as in the sense of aeons.
Yeah, all right. So that's the difference between the Arabic language and the English language. So,
but that would be peculiar to the Arabic language, because as far as I'm aware, I don't know any other language that has the idea that a day is longer than 24 hours.
I don't know all the languages of the world, so I couldn't give you an answer.
I don't know. I don't know if it has it in French or...
I'm pretty sure that in Hebrew, like old earth creationists from the Bible, they argue the same thing. They say the day is epoch, and they use a language kind of evidence base for that.
So it sounds like Quranic Arabic is different to the everyday Arabic.
Yes.
That's strange. Okay. What are you saying?
What's your name, by the way?
My name is Mark.
Mark, nice one, man.
Nice to meet you.
So the creation story, if you like, from an Islamic perspective, is radically different from that which we find in Genesis. Because in Genesis you have this very particular kind of chronology, ordering, and so on. That in the first day God created the night and the day, and the third day created the sun, and the second day, all of those things. We don't find that detailed chronology in the Quranic discourse. And of course the idea that God rested on the seventh day is refuted in the Quranic discourse.
It sounds like you're just saying you don't know.
What? About what?
Well, regarding the existence of the first, regarding the human, how humans came to existence, and regarding the age of the earth. You're saying it sounds like it happened like it's a long time ago, and we just don't really know.
Yeah, I think scientists would say that. Some scientists would say no, it happened 13.9 billion years ago. That is the dominant model now, obviously with Big Bang theory and so on. And we don't reject the fact that there is a possibility that the universe could be 14 billion years old. But for me to tell you that for certain that it did exist for that long would be, I think, intellectual dishonesty. Because we could find, obviously, theories or evidences in the future which counteracts that thesis. But from our perspective, we don't have a problem with that. So we don't have a problem with dinosaurs as well. Like a young age creationist, Christian, would see that the idea of dinosaurs as conspiracy, like, you know, the fossils were thrown in there or something like that. We don't have an issue with it. We don't have an issue with the Earth being 14 billion years old. We don't have an issue with dinosaurs. All of those things are fine for us.
But, right, so I'm just trying to figure out, so basically you don't really know, is what you're saying, regarding the age of the universe and this...
Are you talking about me or the scientific community?
No, I mean, I'm saying the Islamic community.
There's no textual evidences to give you exact dates. We don't have
exact dates, not even estimates.
Not even estimates. So in Jewish tradition, you have a Jewish calendar.
Yeah.
Literally where from the beginning of time until now, that's kind of like, you know, put into calendar format. We don't have such calendar. Our calendar starts when the Prophet migrated. It's called the Hijab calendar. So we don't have the format of, you know, this is the age where the universe began and so on, and now this is 7,000 years on from that, which is what the Jews some Jews would say. We don't have that. So we just have generic Quranic text, which is facilitative of a multi-layered kind of understanding of how long the age of the universe, the Earth, and so on is. And it's up to the scientific community to give us theories and propositions for how long that is, and we can look at the evidences on that basis and either reject or accept them. So this is a secular kind of exercise rather than a religious one. You know? And science should not be done through the lens of religion. I mean, the idea of the scientific method is it should be done independent of any religious supposition, right? Because if you have a religious bias and you impose that on science, obviously, then you're going to have a skewed scientific kind of result.
What if you do it the other way? What about like when you've got like blatant errors in the book that people claim is like really holy and like?
Do you want to come here so I can see?
Not really. I'm happy here, but I can move if you want. If you can't hear it.
Yeah. No,
You can't hear your question over here, mate.
No, because not everyone can
I can't hear your
Oh, I
question.
repeat. Well, I've forgotten it. You repeat it.
You've forgotten the question. So how's,
Yeah. Like you're saying it the one way. We should start with religion, then move towards science. But I'm saying what happens when like religion is just completely at odds with science?
Yeah. So here's a few things that we have to be clear
what was his
about.
question?
And this is where I think there is becoming an increased understanding of how this works. I think I'm going to mention his name again. Thomas Kuhn wrote a good book on this, the structure of scientific revolution, where we have to be careful as to what extent we give epistemic weight to science and scientific discourse.
Yes.
So one thing I would say is that science is not omniscient or able to discover. Yeah, right. So it's not the only guide to truth, and it has the propensity to be corrigible. It's not something which is actually.
But do you think Islam is a good route to truth? Do you think Islam is a good route to truth?
I think Islam, from a rational perspective, requires, like anything else, a discursive rationalization in order for it to be reached. Now, I, as a Muslim, believe in immediate knowledge of God, right? That's a spiritual, a psycho-spiritual perspective. I say that human beings are born believing in God, and that the Quran and the Sunnah, they basically re-guide human beings back to their primordial state. That's my claim.
Yes.
But from a rational perspective, that's a different discussion. Islam, like any other thing out there, needs to be arrived at, not only, right, through spirituality or psychology, although I would maintain that that's enough for me, right? But for others, it might require a discursive rationalization. So the idea that God exists, that the idea that the Prophet Muhammad is a true prophet, like anything else, we say should be rationalized and can be rationalized.
And what is the rationalization for that?
So to start off with God's existence, I'm sure you've heard many kind of arguments, like the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the ontological argument, the contingency argument, and so on. And so those arguments are meant to show that it's actually rationalizable to believe that God is one, God exists, and
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
So when you say God, I'll agree. I'll go along with some sort of God, like pantheism or consciousness, yeah. But you sort of have like a Quranic God or like an Islamic God. But what about all the other gods that we created?
Right, so that's a good question.
Thank you very much.
At this point, I'm not talking about the Islamic understanding of God.
My intuitiveness of your speaking, though, is that it is going to eventually arrive at a Quranic
No,
God.
but at this point in time, when we're talking about a discursive rationalization of God,
Sure.
right? I'm just talking about an idea that revokes atheism, because atheism is the existence that no God is the lack of existence.
You said I can go along with the idea of a God.
Yes.
Right, so he is actually agreeing with you right now.
Right, so that's perfect. If you agree,
But there's another question.
Yeah.
no problem. Now, as our scholars say, we have scholars that there's a very interesting phraseology which is لا مشاحة في الاصطلاح. That you can use whatever word you want to use.
Yes.
If you want to use, for the sake of argument, if you want to use the word consciousness or energy or whatever,
I agree.
I haven't got a problem with that. So long as we accept that there is an entity there which is independent, one, immaterial, incorporeal, and yeah, go ahead.
I know what you're trying to say. You're trying to say what is the common language of discussing these topics?
What I'm saying is that what do we need? This is the question.
But ask him. He knows what he's on about. Ask him.
What I'm saying is, what is required in order for there to be a movement away from atheism into either a deism or a theism? Because both of those things, deism and theism, are naturally averse to the atheistic thesis. Yeah. So if you believe in deism or theism, you can no longer reconcile that belief with atheism. You can't be a deist atheist, right?
But Yeah, I agree.
Right, so
but that's,
what-
that's the argument against hardcore atheists. Most atheists say I'm 99% atheist, and they sort of leave open unanswerable questions, and then they try and get into the nitty-gritty of stuff like evolution and sort of like, well, basically just evolution and material physics and things like this.
Well, evolution is a biological phenomena, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, sure.
So we have to first take a step back, because the existence of evolution depends on biology, and biology depends on chemistry, because what is biology? It's the study of living things,
Yes,
right?
yes.
That's what differentiates biology from chemistry, right? And so we can't even start talking about biology unless we've had a good enough discussion about chemistry and physics.
Sure, yeah.
So obviously the existence of the universe predates the existence of human beings, right? And living creatures in that universe.
Yeah.
So I think a proper and good enough starting point for an atheistic discussion would not be about biology, because that's kind of like a micro aspect. It would be about physics and chemistry.
Can I go the other way? Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
agree with this. I quite like this conversation at the moment. But as soon as you're eventually going to try and walk in the Quran into this conversation, aren't you?
At this point in time, we're talking about.
No, but eventually you're going to. That's where your biases lie.
If you want me to talk about the Quran, I can.
No, I'm going to say
I'll
you're
talk
going to
about-
bring it in. Do you know what I'm saying? Do you agree?
Yeah.
Well, I can bring in whatever you want me to bring in. If you
I
don't
know,
want me
but
to bring
it
in,
just
I won't.
seems- It
right?
just seems a bizarre concept. Like,
Yeah.
am I right? Am I making?
I know what you're saying.
No, look, if I'll have a conversation on whatever you want me to have a conversation on, right?
No, I'm just jumping in.
No,
I'm just.
This is something called poisoning the well, right? If
what
we're
I-
talking about God and this cursive rationalization, how to arrive at the immaterial, incorporate, independent being,
Yes.
right? That's a conversation.
I agree.
That will take someone away from atheism
Yes.
to either deism or theism, okay?
Yeah.
Or at least to agnosticism, right?
Yeah.
But you can't be an atheist and believe in an independent, deistic kind of
So I think
conception of God.
we got to one place, and I'm asking. We've got here.
Yeah.
Now, are you going to bring in the Quran? Are you going to
I can do whatever you want. If you don't want
Let's
to.
do it. Bring it in. Bring it in. Go for it.
All
Why
right,
is the
so-
Quran so brilliant? Go for it.
So it's not about a question of why is the Quran so brilliant. I think the more fundamental question is, now we've discussed the cosmos, and if we do agree that there's one God, and that, or call it whatever you want to call it, this entity, this thing that's independent, incorporeal, material, and so on. Question is the relationship between us as biological entities, as sentient beings, conscious beings, and this other entity, is this meant to be a relationship which is personal or impersonal? That's an important question. So I would submit to you today that it seems quite inconceivable that an all-knowing entity would position human beings on this earth with the ability to make decisions in life and not give them a decision to make. It would seem quite a useless thing to do. And moreover, it would seem even more useless for this entity, which is meant to be the all-knowing and most wise entity, for him or for that entity to be itself, or whatever you want to call it, itself, purposeless,
Yeah,
right?
but haven't you jumped the gun here? Because we all
So
understand.
how do you ascribe purpose? How do you? Sorry.
I don't mind. You started this
Yeah.
conversation. I'm on your side. I'm out like you.
How do you ascribe this purpose to this creator that you're talking about? Because there is a possibility that it could be purposeless.
Yes.
And some have argued that, like the Upanishads and for example, Arthur Schopenhauer was one very famous German philosopher who argued that
Yes.
that God does exist, but it's a purposeless God. It's meaningless. It doesn't have any. And obviously, he made a philosophy out of it, the philosophy of pessimism. But how does Islam differ from that?
So Islam posits that, and in fact there are verses in the Quran about this, yeah? أَيَحْسَبُ الْإِنسَانَ أَن يُتْرَكَ سُدًى. That does the human being think that he will be left purposeless? أَلَمْ يَكُنْ نُطْفَةً مِنْ مَنِيٍّ يُمْنَى. Was that human being not a sperm drop from that which was emitted? ثُمَّ كَانَ عَلَقَةً فَخَلَقَ فَسَوَّى. Then he became a clinging, clot-like thing. So God then created him and proportioned him. أَلَيْسَ ذَلِكَ بِقَادِرٍ عَلَى أَن يُحْيِيَ الْمَوْتَى. Is this entity not able then to raise the dead or to create life after death? So the idea is, number one, there are two kind of questions the Quran mentions, yeah? And it answers the question itself. Number one, why would God be purposeless? I mean, why would this entity that we've talked about itself be a purposeless entity, right? So the Quran says لو أردنا أن نتخذ لهوا لاتخذناه من لدنا إن كنا فاعلين. It says that if we wanted to take some, why would we create the universe, right? And so it says, is it for play? Is it some kind of amusement? Is it some kind of activity which is for entertainment, right? And if we wanted to take an entertainment, we would have done that from within ourselves if we were really going to do that. But then God says, بل يقذف بالحق على الباطل فيدمغه فإذا هو زاهق. This is a falsehood claim, right? It's a claim of falsity. You can't say that God, that creates everything with a teleos, right? With some kind of purpose, would do something without any purpose. To be detached from His creation, to be impersonal, to be, to be aloof, to be an aloof God, if you like. This doesn't make any sense from that perspective.
Yeah, but it doesn't. Just because it doesn't make any sense, so it doesn't mean you can just discard it. Because so far, the Quranic verses you've given me, they haven't mentioned anything about purpose or God's purpose. You just said a sperm becomes a child and then...
No. The verse before, it says, does the human being think
Yeah.
that he will be left aimless, right? And the reason why the sperm thing was mentioned is to show that everything in life has a teleos. That the sperm itself found the egg almost in navigatory fashion, right? It navigated itself to the egg. It was fertilized. It went through a process. All of that required guidance, isn't it? So isn't it? If you had a sperm that didn't know where it was going, think about it, right? What would be the result of that? You wouldn't have any life.
Well,
they detect
no, I mean, obviously the sperm and the egg meet at some point, isn't it? Yeah, so if the sperm didn't know where it was going, imagine if it was like, it had a bad navigation, right? If it had a bad navigation, it would not meet the egg, therefore all of us wouldn't be here today, right? And so the idea is that God fixes a teleos for things, animate or inanimate, whether they have an active intellect or not. And that includes the cosmos and all that's within it. So why did God mention أَيَحْسَبُ الْإِنسَانَ أَن يُتْرَكَ سُدًى? Does the human being think that he'll be left aimless? And then mention sperm. أَلَمْ يَكُ نُطْفَةً مِنْ مَنِيٍّ يُمْنَى. He was a sperm drop. ثُمَّ كَانَ عَلَقَةً. Then he was developed into عَلَقَةً. عَلَقَةً is a clot, that clings on to the uterine whatever wall or whatever of the mother. So if that's the case, there was a whole developmental process that required the divine guidance.
Why does it require divine guidance?
Well, let's not say divine guidance. It required some guidance. Let's just say it's not divine for the sake of argument, right? But if the sperm didn't know where it was going, it wouldn't be fertilized with the egg, right? So it's like it has a special navigation device on it. It knew exactly where it was going. So here, if the argument goes, and you can think about it like this, if God is assigning and ascribing purpose to things with a minimal or, if any, active intellect, then what about us as sentient beings with an active intellect? How could there be no purpose for us? If in our very inception, our beginning was a sperm drop, and then we had purpose. So how could we not have purpose now?
But how do you extrapolate that from a purpose to a sperm cell
because
to a human?
The idea is guidance, right?
A human and a sperm cell is quite different.
Look, I'll tell you why. Let me tell you that this is interesting. I was thinking about this verse myself, right? And what I understood from this verse is, if you think about human beings in the maze of life, we are in a maze of life and we require a special kind of navigation, okay?
We do.
Yeah, well, that's the assumption, right? We're in the maze of life, just like the sperm in the beginning of its life knew where it was going almost intuitively. We would say that was a guidance, a divine guidance. So in our very kind of infant stages, even less before the infant stages and before the genome stage, as a sperm, we knew where we were going. And just as we required that special navigation at that time to know where we're going, now we require a kind of special divine navigation to also know where we're going at this point. So that requires...
When you say we, you're including
human
the sperm
beings
and the human being at the same time. But sperm and human being are very different.
Well, we started off as sperm, isn't it? If you think about it. I mean, if it wasn't for a sperm, we wouldn't be
its
here.
complexity is incredibly small.
I think it's quite different
compared to humans.
When you say purpose, when you say purpose, and you talk about human beings, I think in the everyday language, I think that means something quite different to a sperm going after an egg.
Well, there's similarities and differences. The similarity is the assumption of guidance. We need to get from point A to point B. For us as Muslims, we believe that there's a spiritual guidance that we require. We're not just here purposeless. If the sperm was a purposeless entity, it wouldn't know where it's going and we wouldn't be here. And we say the same thing. If we are purposeless entities, we wouldn't know where we're going and we wouldn't get anywhere. And so what's required is for us to realize our navigatory purpose in life and to navigate in that direction. And that's what the divine guidance was. So all the prophets, we believe, and messengers, including Noah and Abraham and all those other prophets that you might have heard of, Jesus and Moses, they came to tell their people about this special kind of divine guidance. And really what it is to obey the divine law. Because in the Islamic understanding, everything in the universe is either willingly or unwillingly submissive to the divine command.
Including humans.
Including human beings. The only difference is, because human beings by...
Because that doesn't really explain why there are so many societies which are not religious.
That's a really good question.
It sounds like what you're saying to me, that religion or the belief in a God is intrinsic to the human. Is that?
Absolutely.
Well, then that would explain a lot about societies that don't believe in God and atheistic societies.
Yes. No, but even those, right.
And even prehistory, a lot of societies didn't really believe in it.
Yeah. No, that's accounted for by the Islamic narrative. So the Prophet Muhammad said in the Hadith, which is narrated by Abu Hurairah, he says, "Kullu mawludin yuladu ala al-fitrati." Everyone that is born upon a primordial disposition to believe in the one God. Then his parents socialize him into being Jew, Christian, or Magian, and so on, right? So we believe that those other ways of life are an aberration from the primordial state. So in other words, being a Jew, or being a Christian, or being a Magian, or being an atheist are all social constructs.
Including Jewish and Christian.
Yeah, but
No.
Judaism and Christianity,
Not
parts
Islam.
of it are true, parts of it are true, and parts of it are not. So the parts of it are social constructs.
But Islam is not socialization.
Yeah, so Islam.
claim.
Yeah, that's the claim.
Quite a claim.
The claim is that Islam is itself a recognition of the primordial state. That's a claim. I told you that's immediate knowledge that we believe is fitrah. It's a primordial state, right?
Because it doesn't sound like there's much there. You're just saying it's intrinsic and it's a primordial disposition towards believing in Islam. Because if you look at the history of humanity, Islam is a very, very young religion.
Yeah.
So I mean, why would that make Islam a religion which doesn't socialize, as opposed to Judaism, Christianity, or pantheism, which you believe does socialize?
Well, look, I bet, I'm not saying that you haven't asked a good question, but a better question would be possibly, right? Why would something that's a social construct be false in the first place, right? Because just because something is socially constructed, it doesn't mean it's false. That's one point. I think the best way out of this is to ask the question, which of those world systems has the most rational system for us as human beings? And so we say that Islam is the only religion which gives you a rational understanding of who this one God is.
You haven't mentioned that. I've asked you several times, but you haven't really mentioned this rationality of the God, because you've just said the sperm becoming attaching itself to the uterus wall and becoming a baby and a human being, but it doesn't sound like there's a lot there to understand God in the Islamic religion.
Well, that's because I only quoted one verse out of 6,236.
All right, fair enough.
But that was just the one I chose to tell you. I don't know, because you were talking about aimlessness, and I thought there are about 4 or 5 verses of the Quran which talk about that. That's just the one I decided to pick out. So yeah, I mean, what I'm saying to you is first and foremost, Islam has the most rational understanding or cogent understanding of God, of all of the major world religions. So for example, take Trinitarianism, right? Where you have 3 persons and one entity, right? We say that's a self-contradiction. Look at atheism.
I got something to say about that. Just a side point. If you look into quantum theory, you're going to find everything is irrational, and it's the basis of our reality.
Okay.
That's all I want to say. If you look at the basis of everything, it doesn't make rational sense. And we're saying that an all-powerful being has to be rational when everything that we're made of is irrational.
I think that makes sense to a certain degree, but I think there's a difference. You made a good point. With quantum physics, right, the difference is that just because we don't know why the paradoxes exist between the quantum world and the macro scientific world, it doesn't mean that means that that's irrational. It just means that we don't know what it is yet.
Sure,
So
but
is
that's the fundamental basis of everything that we know.
What
So
is-
surely we should tackle that before we
I
say
think
that this God is the most rational
Well,
thing.
I'll tell you why that's not the case, right? Quantum theory, you arrive at it through the scientific method, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the scientific method is presupposed by logical principles, which are metaphysical, non-naturalistic and non-material. And so from that angle, science could not exist without logic, but logic can exist without science. And from that angle, talking about quantum mechanics, in any way that aims to put it against, for example, the laws of logic, and allow it to triumph over it, would be an intellectual miscarriage of justice.
I don't think so. I think assuming that reality is logical and rational is the first mistake. I don't think there's anything logical about existence or rational about it.
Does logic exist outside of us? Are we just trying to force logic on
That's
something?
exactly what you mean. I was going to
nothing
say,
to do with
I was
us?
going
strange.
to explain it in a
do you
different way.
believe in
but definitely,
do you
I
believe in
understand exactly what you're trying to say.
do you believe in
The
something
basis
called
itself is
do
irrational.
you believe in logic or not?
The beginning.
Do you believe in logical
Rational about
principles?
existing?
Do you believe in the existence of logical principles?
I think logic is there, but when you say, "Do I believe?" I mean, that's a weird statement to
Oh, I
arrive
see.
at. Like, what you know?
Does it exist? Do logical principles exist?
Do you mean beyond what we think is logical?
No.
Like,
For example, the
independent
law
of
of
us?
non-contradiction. Yeah. Does that exist, or is it some? Is it not? Does it not exist?
Well, that would, as a statement, that does exist.
Not as a statement, as a reality. If I say that contradictions cannot coexist,
But they do. They do. That's
so,
what I'm
so
talking
you
about.
believe in contradictions?
Man, you can observe them.
No, I'm not talking about on a physical level. I'm
No,
talking
as a
about
statement,
on
as
a
a-
ontologically.
But
Yeah.
what value does that have? If I
Very,
can show,
very big value.
in word games it is, but
Why
not
do you think?
if we're trying to go for something real. Like if
Right.
you look at the basis of reality, and I'm saying that
So you don't believe in logic?
I'm going to keep going.
All right, sorry.
You look at the basis of reality, and you see contradictions inherent in it. You've got contradictions there, right there.
let me-
So whether
let-
I
can
say
I-
that it matters or not, it's not important.
Can I explain why that's a misunderstanding? Right. So when you talk about quantum theory, you're looking at perceived contradictions, because quantum theory.
Everything's perception.
No. Quantum theory, like everything scientific, requires instruments to be able to get to that knowledge, which, by the way, have been disputed, like in the scientific community. Do we have reliable instruments enough to get to the quantum level and so on? And requires inference. So you have instruments and inference. Now, the inference that you're going to have is going to be based on the dominant scientific paradigm that we have at the moment, right? And when you use that dominant scientific paradigm and it doesn't give you the results you want on the quantum level, then you start saying there's a contradiction. This sounds like there's got. You could make an argument that there will be a scientific paradigm shift as a result of that. That's exactly how Newtonian physics moved to Einsteinian
That's
physics.
right.
There might be now someone who comes out, an Einstein 2, if you like, and he says, look, I know a way to account for these aberrational quantum physics results and also account for the macro science.
Yeah.
So I have an all-inclusive theory. If that theory is proposed, that theory will be accepted, and what the Einsteinian general relativity theory, the dominant paradigm, will be replaced. That's all that will happen. Now, for us to say now, before that transition takes place, that okay, that means that there are contradictions existing, it's not a justifiable statement, because actually we're basing it on our scientific understanding based on the model that we have at the moment. If the model changes, the contradictions may be explained.
Yeah,
If the
that's
model,
true.
do you see what I mean?
It can be. I'm fully
you-
open to that
you agree with me,
possibility.
right?
I'm open to the idea.
So now we agree.
I'm saying, of course, it might be shown to be non-contradictory, but at the moment it's not.
Right.
And I can't assume infinite knowledge,
But
and
what-
I would extend that and say neither can you.
Yeah, 100%. So what I'm saying is, the reason why I say that logical principles are more epistemically certain than the scientific method is because the whole scientific method is based on logical principles, rather than logical principles being based on the scientific method. So it's not possible for logic to be based on science, but it's possible for science to be based on logic.
No, I
If
understand
logic
that.
collapses, science collapses. If science collapses, logic stays the same. And the same thing with mathematics, right? Mathematics has been argued, but with severe refutation, to be an extension of logic, although that's not the case. We know it's not the case. Well, these are ontological concepts. They're non-cosmological in nature. You can't put numbers under a microscope, and for that reason, mathematics, you could argue, although there have been claims in philosophy to show the incompleteness of it, by Gödel, for example, is more incorrigible, or more likely to be incorrigible than science. So science, in epistemic weighting compared to logical principles and mathematical principles, is probably bottom of the list because of the susceptibility of science to corrigibility.
Right. Yeah. There's an idea that mathematics is decoding the code of the universe.
Yes.
Has the essence of it in itself. So, like you say, mathematics seems to exist whether we like it or not, whether we understand it or perceive
Absolutely.
it or not.
So that's
It's
why
like
I
the
say,
code.
perfect. And this is why when we talk about the existence of God, right, which is the first thing we talked about today, what the arguments I put forward are not just cosmological. Because cosmological arguments are contingent upon scientific understandings. If I give you an argument for the existence of God, which talks about everything that begins to exist has a cause, and the universe began to exist, therefore the universe had a cause, that highly depends upon our understanding of science. So I can, for example, cite the second law of thermodynamics or the Big Bang Theory redshift. I'm not using that. I mean, I could use that and say I believe in those things. I believe that the universe was created ex nihilo and so on. But I'm saying that we can prove the existence of God ontologically as well as cosmologically. So in other words, it can be done as a mental understanding, like mathematics, like logic, as well as cosmologically. And that basically leaves for someone no room to run or no room to hide. If you believe in the ontological superiority of the cosmos, then you will be forced to believe that there's an independent one entity which is incorporeal, immaterial, and which everything else depends on.
Or it could be all a product of yourself. Everything that you observe could be a product of your own creation. It could be you, the point of awareness that we all have, creating everything.
But here's the thing.
Why not?
I'll tell you something, right?
I don't see that being refuted.
Well, this is the discussion in philosophy, right? So the discussion is, how do we prove that cosmological realities are any more epistemically true than ontological ones? But for example, like ontological ones is in the mind. When I say ontology, I'm talking about that which is in the mind, yes? So mathematics is in the mind. So if I say mathematics is an ontological thing, yes? And it has nothing to do with cosmos. Nothing to do with the cosmos, yeah? Which means nothing to do with the physical reality. And mathematics itself is something which is, we've agreed, is actually stronger than the scientific method and its churnings, or that which can be produced from it as a net result of it.
Can you have science without math, though?
Pardon?
Maybe it's a bit of a diversion,
Sorry?
but can you have science without math?
Can you have science without maths?
Yeah. No, just an open question. Maybe we don't want to target that right now.
But you can't have physics without maths, for sure.
Interesting point.
Physics will be a difficult thing to prove that you can have
And
without
that's the
maths.
basis of science, is physics.
Well, you could argue that's an argument.
Well,
right?
I think so, because it's looking at the basis of reality. It's looking at the fundamental particles of existence.
Yeah.
Everything else is contingent upon that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'd say it is the
Yeah, you
fundamental
could
science.
argue, but and values and stuff that they're attached to mathematics.
Values?
Yeah.
What do you mean by values? You mean moral values?
No, not
Right,
moral.
okay, I was like,
no,
fuck. You lost me completely.
gravitational constant, the value of how heavy this thing is.
Right.
All of those need numbers, otherwise they're meaningless.
Right,
Otherwise
yeah,
you put
yeah.
letters next to them or something,
Yeah,
right?
so I understand that.
Yeah.